Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. This is a series I put together to accompany an advanced ceramics class I'll be teaching in the spring. But if you are a ceramic lover, an artist, or just like to dabble into the ceramics realm, you may find this video useful. This is tool making part 2, where we're going to get into making objects out of wood. There was a little bit of wood involved in the part 1 video, which I will link in this description. But the part 2 is going to be solely focused on just wood components and what you can do to make large custom sticks, small custom sticks, ribs, and to also make yourself some paddles. So let's get into this. Wooden hand tools, your wooden profile carving tools, are probably the most common to find, and they're also going to be the most easiest ones to make because wood is very malleable. You can carve into it very easily. Depending on the type of wood that you select will depend on how easy it is to do the carving. Sometimes if you have extra wooden tools, it might be even easier just to start off adapting the tools that you have. I have an extra of this one. If there's a specific function I'm trying to make, oftentimes I'll just take something I already have and adapt it as long as it's an extra version of that tool. Honestly, I have all these wooden sticks and I hardly ever use them. The techniques that I'm going to apply to the raw wood are going to be the same techniques that you would apply to an existing tool by adapting it for whatever. Necessity is the mother of invention. You really should have a plan. You want to have an idea of what it is that you need that tool to do before you go on taking on making that tool, because you don't really know what the heck to make if you don't know what you need the tool to do. Now, it's always best to find something that you already have laying around. Hopefully you like some sushi or some Chinese food, and you'll have some chopsticks laying around that are throwaway chopsticks. My favorite kind are actually the cheapier ones that are still connected, because you can get some mileage out of not breaking them apart. I also like the fact that it is a flat. Go raid your cabinets and see what you have first. I usually go and pick up some hardwood dowels. You can get hardwood dowels at your hardware store. These I got at Home Depot. Mahogany is actually my all-time favorite wood to carve. It's a hardwood, but it is soft and the grain is pretty tight and forgiving, so you can get some really good detail without trying to hit some funky patch of grain. Dowels also come in square stock. They may also have some flat stock. I have this bamboo stake. I picked up a package of bamboo stakes for marking plants from Daiso. They're nice and flat and great for carving. Let's take out the tools for this. This bad boy right here. This is pretty much my go-to. My pocket utility knife. Sure, there are many other types of fancy carvers, but I cannot praise this tool enough because I get most of my carving done with this, and the beauty is that when the tip gets dull, I just change out the blade. There's no stopping to have to sharpen tools and reset things. That would be my #1 suggestion, to go to this first and then get yourself a stack of various grit sandpaper. You'll want maybe an 80 grit, a 120 grit, and a 220 grit. Let's take a look at other carving tools though, so you know what's available. You have your smaller hand carvers. You can get a basic set of these. I actually found some at Daiso. They're not that great of quality. It's not as big of a pack as this. I think there's only like 5 or so in there. For what you're going to be using them for carving tools, it'll probably get you there. You probably don't need to get anything fancy. This is a woodworker's carving set. It's a little bit more expensive. The steel is high quality steel. I've sharpened these. The ones that I tend to gravitate towards are the sweeper ones, the ones that look like little cup shapes at the bottom, and the V-groove. So this is a smaller set. Really good ones, the larger ones that I use for larger project carving. Various brands make them. This Swiss brand is the middle of the road. There are some really cheap ones out there that you probably can get at Harbor Freight. And then there are going to be some more expensive ones. You get what you pay for. The cheapy ones are doable, but you're going to be back on that sharpening stone, resharpening your tools more often than you would with something that is a higher quality. With these harder ones, I can probably get through a medium-sized project without having to sharpen. The Harbor Freight quality tools I have tried using, they're doable, but you'll be sharpening them maybe 2 to 3 times for a medium-sized project, maybe even more. The metal that they're made out of is just not as strong. Need to make some more tool rolls. Next up are your files. These I got at Harbor Freight, and I don't mind using the Harbor Freight ones because I don't sharpen these. Once your file loses its filiness, whatever it is, the tooth on it, pretty much are replacing them anyway. And I don't use files nearly enough for me to justify buying the more expensive ones. I do have one Nicholson somewhere. It's like a $50 for one file. Not in this grouping, must be in another tool roll. In all of my woodworking for 20 plus years, I've used that file maybe once. So, yeah, I actually use the jeweler's files with metal more than I use these files on woodworking. As it's not a tool that I've found use for that often, I don't have higher quality versions of them. Because these microplane are like amazing. And I actually should get a couple more. I really like this microplane. They have another profile. I think I have one somewhere. It's a rounded profile. It looks like a round file like this. And they just shave wood like nobody's business. The microplanes replaced the need for a file. So let's say I was trying to like get in here and want to carve this curve. I could use this. I don't even need the round one. I could just tick this to the side and just kind of go to town, arguing away at a piece of wood to get me that profile before I go to the sander. Smaller items, you want to work with hand tools. You don't really want to be putting these tiny little pieces of wood up against a big machine. That is just way too close for comfort for your fingers to be near the blade. So ultimately, you're going to be working with hand tools. The last thing I think that would be totally helpful to have is some sort of vise or clamp and a handsaw. So the first tool I ever made, I was way back in my junior college, and I was trying to make a ceramic piece that looked like Allion. Allion was actually my very first like clay hero. There was a poster of one of his teapots hanging on the wall in my ceramics class in Rhode Island, and I asked my instructor, Nick Savini, to teach me how to carve wood, how to make clay look like wood. He told me that I needed to hand make some custom tools that were going to give me the ability to carve these textured details that I wanted to carve. So he recommended chopsticks, and that's where I started. So I'm gonna do a finger comb. I'm gonna use my saw, and this is a dovetail saw. And I'm just very gently pulling because this is a very small piece. I eventually met Allion at Amoca. It was like one of the best days ever for me. He had on display all of his handmade tools for texturing wood. And they were pretty similar. So now I'm gonna shave this down a bit. And here's my trusty pocket knife. I put in those notches. Now I'm gonna open up that spacing just a bit more. I'm just gently working with my pocket knife. It's always best to work with the piece down so you don't accidentally cut yourself. Okay, now I can take my little jeweler's file, if I have one. All right, look at that beauty. That's pretty good and ready to do some texturing like some wood. Oh, look at my texture. We're gonna move on to making some larger sticks and ribs. You're gonna need to figure out your thickness of wood that you're gonna wanna be using. I had some of this scrap laying around. I think will get me there for my stick. This piece I was able to get at Home Depot. This one, well, not used. I also got this one at Home Depot, but you can get varying thicknesses. So we're gonna skip that one. We're gonna use this one to make some ribs, and this one, I have a special stick in mind, thinking about my dragon interior, this large series project I've been taking on, and I have a particular piece in mind where I want a custom stick. This is probably good to stick with this length. I don't really need too much more than that. That'll be good. And then I want to think about my profile, because you have to kind of think in the opposite, right? So if I know that I want my shape to look like maybe this little lump here, this little lump here, followed by a little seat here, and like that's what I want the end of my piece to look like, then I have to make the opposite on my stick. So I need to cut all this junk out. Then when I stick this stick up against my piece of ceramic, it'll give me that profile. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out on my bandsaw. I cut down my piece using the chop saw before I come over to do this head. I'm gonna be putting in some relief cuts first before I take the major part of the cut. I'm a little unhappy with the thickness of this piece, so I'm going to try and cut down some of the thickness just a bit. Having this big open gap on a bandsaw is not a good thing when you're dealing with small pieces, so I'm putting this extra piece down so I have a smaller throat. Still got some cleanup to do. I gotta get in here and do some better profiling because this is not exactly the curve that I want, but I knew that it would be a lot easier to do this profiling once I've sanded this more to a point. I'm just starting with some 60 grit. Got it curled in a bit of a tube. Well, this wood I am using is walnut. It's a pretty hard wood, much harder than the mahogany. Profile that you wanted, and it's a little bit less than that curve. And you can keep working it. And once I have made sure the profile is that I want, I have to shave this edge down. I'm going to do this on both sides, get to a center point. I'm just trying to get myself to somewhat of this tip. Alright, and that looks like I should get what I want. So I can jam this up against my piece and it'll hopefully trim that shape. I like the idea of having a rib that has a 45-degree cut for trimming a perfect bevel. This comes in handy if I'm looking to install cleats into my piece or beveling the underside of a piece. I'm going to put in a 45 cut for the first side and 90-degree back cut. This is going to be very easy to chop on my chop saw. If you wanted something like this, you just take it over to the bandsaw, similar to what I did for the stick. Cranked my chop saw over to a 45-degree angle already, and there's different angles here, so you can set your saw to whatever angle you're trying to go to. Maybe you want to cut a 30-degree or a 15-degree bevel. That was my first cut. I'm going to crank this back to 0. Get my last cut in. And now it's just a matter of sanding up my edges. Well, that sure took some doing, but I got it all sanded down. I got this nice 45-degree point there, a nice 90-degree angle here so I can get a good crisp edge there. Yeah, wooden rib. We're gonna move on to making paddles. And I actually don't even have a paddle here in the studio to show you as a reference because I need some. So we're gonna make some paddles. This is 3/4 inch plywood and this is a very high grade plywood. There's nice and solid layers, a walnut veneer over the top of it, so it'll give me a nice looking paddle as well. You can use pretty much any type of plywood. I'm okay with the way that this shape is and the size. I think this would give me a good handle and a nice starting point. I like a short handle paddle. I'm gonna just do a pretty standard squarish paddle before I get into doing a shaped one. I'm gonna go with this right here. And I'm gonna first just take this over to my chop saw and cut this little piece off. You can either make these out of solid wood or plywood. Plywood is gonna be generally cheaper than your hardwood. The reason why I go with hardwood for some of those hand tools is, especially like the ribs, it's more likely to be submerged in water. You'll want something solid for those type of tools because the laminations on your plywood are put together with glue, and the glue over time can become worn down. But for something like a paddle, you're usually using these on a leather hard piece. Plywood would be perfect for a tool like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay in where my handle's gonna go. I'm going to just take this over to the bandsaw. These two little pieces are going to get cut out. I might as well give this a slight round rather than doing it on the sander. I'm just going to finish up bits of that sand in by hand, some of the spots that the sander could not reach. And there it is. Alright, let's do a pointed paddle. Why not? And there you have it. 2 paddles. I'm not gonna put any kind of finish on these. They're not in contact with as much moisture. Alright y'all, I am gonna call this video here. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me today. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already. Stick around for more exciting projects to come.